Good afternoon, everyone. My today's presentation topic is the institution, the repetition, and the periphery, theorizing the avant-garde and neo-avant-garde. These are my academic and presentation details. This is the table of contents. My research question is, how does the neo-avant-garde negotiate the failed historical project of the original avant-garde, and how does the post-colonial periphery decenter this Western narrative? My hypothesis is the neo-avant-garde is a deferred comprehension of the historical avant-garde's institutional critique. At the periphery, artists appropriated avant-garde syntax as a vital weapon of anti-colonial resistance rather than an aesthetic game. Introduction is historical avant-garde from 1910 to 1925. Started from Dada movement, surrealism, and constructivism. Crisis of bourgeois society aimed to merge art with the praxis of life. Neo-avant-garde, spanning roughly from 1950s to 1970s, the major movements was pop culture, conceptual art, institutional critique. Its context was post World War II, consumer capitalism, the reprise of historical strategies within the museum space. Peripheral modernisms, 1920s onward, artists utilizing avant-garde rapture to subvert imperial cultural hegemony. Peter Bürger, the pioneer of the avant-garde movement, he says the avant-gardist protest whose aim is to reintegrate art into the praxis of life reveals the nexus between autonomy and absence of any consequences. The target was that Berger posits that the historical avant-garde sought the sublation of art into the praxis of life, taking the very institution of art itself. He argues that this unification can only succeed by liberating aesthetic potential from the institutional constraints which block its social effectiveness. Ultimately, the historical break resulted not in destroying the institution but in the destruction of the possibility of posing aesthetic norms as valid ones. The paradox of neo-avant-garde. Berger argues that the neo-avant-garde staged the break a second time, resulting in a manifestation void of sense. By repeating historical gestures within a museum setting, the neo-avant-garde unwittingly institutionalized the avant-garde as art and thus negate genuinely avant-gardist intentions. The genuine intention of avant-garde movement was to get the art out from the museums and let it be available for the common public. But what a neo-avant-garde does was that they let their art, the new kind of their arts, back into the museums. Just as Bucklow argues that the neo-avant-garde provided cultural legitimation for the post-war liberal burgesses. Consequently, as Bucklow argues, these one radical strategies now mainly serve the transformation of the burgess public sphere into the public sphere of the corporate state. Case study: the monochrome paradigm. The action: it exhibits three canvases of pure primary color, red, yellow, and blue, that ultimately symbolizes nothing and are mostly against the conventional art or paintings. Its intent was to uh, m- uh, lay the foundations for a new culture of the collective rather than continuing one of the specialized burguese elite. They did not want to paint or do anything for the elite society. The neo-avant-garde repetition, Klein, 1957. This image you can see is the of from Klein, the plain blue color. There is nothing significant in it. Klein's neo-avant-garde repetition dictated the concept of art as transcendental negation and esoteric experience, designed precisely for that some burgess elite. And in fact, these kind of paintings were purchased by the elites as well. Uh, Nasta Gleichheit, deferred action. This is the concept by Sigmund Freud, where we see that When you have any memory of trauma, you cannot realize that right away, but you need some time. When you grow up, you realize these the main significance of these traumatic past, such as Hal Foster defenses of Neo-Avant-Garde. He critiques Berger's residual evolutionism for treating the historical avant-garde as pure origin and the neo-avant-garde as a raven reputation. As the Berger said that the value of avant-garde is lost, but Foster argues that it is not so. Using Freudian deferred action, Foster asserts that the status of the historical avant-garde is actually retroactive effect of countless artistic responses and critical readings. The act of repetition. Historical events acquire full meaning only through subsequent repetition and strategic revision. Therefore, rather than cancel the original project, the neo-avant-garde might actually comprehend it for the first time. So the value of avant-garde might have been realized late in the neo-avant-garde movement, according to Foster. The evolution into institutional critique. From literal repetition to systematic analysis, the initial reception of the ready-made by the first neo-avant-garde tended to render it formal and or arbitrary, to recop it as art and or a commodity. By systematic investigation says that conversely, the pressure of historical awareness meant that later artists had to elaborate them critically, shifting the focus towards systematic investigation of the institutional art. They did not wanted to let their art be in the public, but they also put their art into museum. Berger's 2010 concession. Decades later, Berger acknowledged that the historical failure to transform reality ironically enables this highly successful internal aesthetic critique of the institution. Decentering the canon, the view from the periphery. Here comes Mitter. He says that in his challenges the complex discourse of power, authority, and hierarchy that Western art historians use to study the non-Western avant-garde. In the term Picasso Mank means that the Eastern country painters just repeat or just copy the art of Picasso, and it is a failed copy due to them. But here, Mitter argues that Western art history often evaluates non-Western modernism as inherently uh, derivative. He argues against the reductionist criteria that views successful imitation as aping and imperfect imitation as failure of learning. The erasure of agency. By treating the periphery as a delayed echo of the center, the Western canon ignores intentional heuristic choices. Categorizing peripheral art this way erases how the artist engage in a purposeful activity that involves making conscious choices. These writers do not just copy Picasso, they make conscious choices by themselves from a range of global sources. Appropriation as anti-colonial resistance, visual syntax for resistance. Revolutionizing messages of the Western avant-garde provided the syntax to construct cultural resistance against the colonial order. Used avant-garde primitivism to interrogate urban industrial values and restore pro-colonial community identities. Peripheral artists participated in a virtual cosmopolis of shared intellect that engaged elective affinities between the elites of the center and the periphery. Synthesizing the debate, final conclusion. The historical avant-garde's attempt to merge art and life failed, according to Berger. Yet the neo-avant-garde represents a deferred completion that evolved into rigorous institutional critique, decentering the Western debate. Beyond Western norms, the avant-garde was appropriate as a vital tool for anti-colonial resistance and virtual cosmopolitanism in the periphery. The true legacy of neo-avant-garde lies in providing a radical syntax used globally to dismantle systems of cultural and political hegemony. Berger maintains that the historical avant-garde ultimately failed in most radical goal, the sublimation of art into the practice of life, but it is not the case so, according to Foster. This is the infographics of my whole presentation. These are my references. Thank you, everyone.